Hi, this is Troy Smith, and you're watching Restaurant Rewind, Episode 1. What happened to Sandy's Drive-In? Today we're taking a closer look at a fast food restaurant that was poised to be at the top of the burger food chain. Sandy's Drive-In was a direct competitor to McDonald's, and some would claim better, but for some reason it never quite hit that top spot. Today we'll explore Sandy's beginnings, its unique business structure, the rapid expansion and success, the quickly changing fast food landscape, and finally, the merger that ended with Sandy hanging up her plaid kilt for good. To understand how Sandy's Drive-In came to be, we need to first take a closer look at another well-known fast food chain. Ah yes, we all know McDonald's, and you probably remember that Ray Kroc worked a deal with Dick and Mac McDonald, the founders of McDonald's in 1940, to get McDonald's franchised across the country. There's a lot more to that story, but in short, the first Ray Kroc franchised McDonald's opened in Des Plaines, Illinois. Interestingly, McDonald's has often referred to this location as McDonald's number 1. Kroc wasted no time in selling franchises. After meeting Kroc and seeing his vision, 4 friends from Kewanee, Illinois decided they might like to cash in on this new fast food idea. And in June 1956, they opened their first McDonald's restaurant near the University of Illinois in Urbana. Now, keep in mind, this Urbana unit was only the 3rd McDonald's franchise outside of the state of California at that time. Gus Brick Lundberg, Robert C. Winger, Paul White, and W.K. Davidson enjoyed early success with their McDonald's, and apparently they were so successful that Kroc often showcased their store when interviewing potential McDonald's franchisees. That next year, in 1957, the group decided they would like to open 3 more locations, 4 total, so that there would be 1 store for each of them to manage. As the group forged ahead, they understood that the central Illinois market had been promised to them with first right of refusal, and so they targeted the markets of Decatur and Peoria to fulfill their plan. There was only one problem. They discovered that the Decatur territory had been sold to someone else. Angered but determined, they moved forward with the Peoria market. Apparently, after setting their sights on Sheridan Road in Peoria, the men called Kroc to confirm the territory and found out that he had also sold that territory to someone else. At this point, the partners were livid, and they decided they would still move forward with opening their Peoria location, but under a new name and a new brand clearly developed to compete against Kroc and his McDonald's. They decided since McDonald's sounded like a Scottish name, their brand would use a Scottish theme. On August 8, 1958, with a dancing Scottish lass as their mascot, Sandy's Drive-In was born. Now, initially, none of the 4 founders were interested in expanding their local chain past the planned 4 restaurants. Lundberg, in particular, viewed the enterprise modestly as a chance to build a people-oriented organization whose members worked hard but also had some fun while earning a legitimate profit. The menu of the first Sandy's restaurant included a 15-cent hamburger, a 20-cent milkshake, a 10-cent bag of fries, much like you'd find at McDonald's. The Sandy's restaurants were smaller and had less corporate, more personal feel, especially to the employees. But Sandy's was different in a number of ways from other fast food chains of the time. Number 1, in ownership. Operators of most Sandy's restaurants owned their stores and did not lease real estate from the corporation. McDonald's, for example, held the leases and in turn would sublease to the franchisee with a percentage of the profit being added to the terms of the sublease. Many major chains do this today. Number 2, freedom. Operators were not required to buy supplies from the corporation, instead being permitted to shop around as long as the supplies met company standards. Other chains would usually purchase the supplies and then resell them to the operators for a profit. But not Sandy's. Number 3, relationships were critical. Brick Lundberg visited every store regularly, and he became personally acquainted with each employee. It was this focus on keeping things personal that laid the foundation for success by fostering trust through transparency. Few chains have ever exemplified that level of personal interaction between corporate executives and hourly store employees. From the beginning, the Scottish theme was kept intact. From the kilt-wearing dancing mascot to the plaid-laden signage and building, Sandy's founders wanted customers to, at least subconsciously, see that Sandy shared in the same heritage as McDonald's. Although McDonald's didn't use any Scottish references in its branding, it was hoped that through this close alignment, customers would see that Sandy's had every right to compete in the same space as McDonald's and any other major chain at that time. We can't discuss the Sandy's brand without taking a look at the building. The unique architecture of the Sandy's building was as much a part of the brand as anything else. From the first store in 1958, Sandy's evolved through 4 different generations of building types. As with most 1950s fast food hamburger establishments, Sandy's started out as a walk-up, order-and-go restaurant, which evolved eventually into inside dining. Generation 1 buildings were the traditional walk-up establishments. They were simple yet effective. These buildings were visually appealing with the roof jutting out in 3 directions, supported by huge wooden beams that seemed to symbolize upward movement with a strong foundation. A glass enclosure was soon developed to allow customers to order without standing outside during cold weather. In the late 1960s, the Generation 2 buildings were introduced. Along with indoor ordering, these newer buildings now featured indoor seating. They were still very similar to the Generation 1 buildings, but with permanent glass windows between the trademark wooden beams to allow for the added seating. A couple of years after recognizing the need for a fresh face, Generation 3 buildings were introduced. These looked much like the Generation 2, but the signage and trim were changed to streamline and freshen up the look. The Generation 1, 2, and 3 buildings all used a very similar footprint, but sometimes a slightly different size. Seeing major shifts in the fast food industry, Generation 4 buildings were a total redesign, and they didn't resemble the original Sandy's architecture in any way. Frankly, most people, me included, thought that this design was boring, yet it was in line with what the other bigger chains such as McDonald's and Burger Chef were doing at the time. Sandy's had 2 versions of the Generation 4 restaurants to offer prospective franchisees, the Mini and the Maxi. The Mini was for smaller markets or segments of a city, while the Maxi was built for power. Bring in as many people as possible, serve them in a timely manner, and give them a quality dining experience. All 4 generations of these Sandy's buildings were designed by another Kewanee native, Bob Armstrong. As mentioned before, relationships were important, and the founders of Sandy's liked to do business with people they knew well. According to an account from his son, Armstrong built different sizes of the winged building. There were various configurations depending on the location. Each franchise had slightly different needs, and so Sandy's leadership tried to accommodate those needs without offering a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter type building. This adjustment is noticeable when you look at the Decatur West location. As incredible as it sounds today, in the late 50s and early 60s, Sandy's was the first fast food experience for many towns in the Midwest. And it was still years before McDonald's would appear in certain parts of the country. After the first store opened in August 1958 in Peoria, the following year saw a second location in St. Louis, quickly followed by one in Quincy, Illinois, one in Moline, and the 5th in Decatur. By 1965, the franchise had exploded to 100 locations, with the 100th, along with the new company headquarters, opening in the 4 owners' hometown of Kewanee, Illinois, amidst much fanfare. The system, as it was called, had exploded into 19 states. So why did it take 7 years for them to build a store in Kewanee? Quite simply, size. Kewanee just wasn't big enough. To stay competitive, you needed some volume to sell things at those low prices, and Kewanee simply didn't have the population of Champaign-Urbana, Peoria, Decatur, and Quincy where those first stores were opened. Eventually, the Sandy's executives figured out a way to rationalize placing a store in too small Kewanee. They made plans to use it as a training and test site for new products and equipment. Now let's rewind a few years. Sandy's immediate success wasn't lost on Ray Kroc, and McDonald's filed a lawsuit citing a breach of contract by Sandy's, that Lundberg and his partners had signed an agreement not to compete or operate a competing business within Illinois or surrounding states. The 7-year-long court battle with McDonald's finally ended in an out-of-court settlement in 1965, whereby McDonald's agreed to drop their appeal and allow Sandy's to operate, and Sandy's agreed to forfeit their existing Urbana McDonald's location. For more information on that lawsuit, I'll be posting a video of that soon, so be sure to check back for a link to that. Sandy's success continued during and in spite of the 7-year court battle, and much of the success is credited to the business acumen and charisma of Sandy's driving force, Brick Lundberg. I thought I could do 6 times more what he wanted me to do. He gave me the determination and made me feel that I was a chosen one. I really felt chosen. And a janitor remembers that Brick extended the same courtesies to him as to others, making him feel as an important part of the organization. Clearly, Brick's personal touch had much to do with the success of the organization. Every employee was made to feel capable. Every employee could believe he or she was making an important contribution. Lundberg was a big proponent of personal development, and he enlisted the help of Earl Nightingale, the co-founder of motivational company Nightingale Conant, to create the Win with Sandy's training record.
Sandy's wants to help you get into the top 5% and stay there. That's where Sandy's is, and to work at Sandy's, you've got to be there too. And the rules for success you will learn at Sandy's will work for you no matter what you do in life. They'll help you get the education you want and go on to success in any career in life you choose. So now, let's get down to the rules.
In 1961, insurance man Jack Lockery was so impressed with Lundberg and his business approach that he left a successful insurance practice to join Sandy's. The past 7 years had been incredibly hard work for Lundberg. He drove many thousands of miles per month and had little time for anything else, and it was time to strike a better balance. Sandy's had grown from just 7 stores in Illinois in 1959 to 121 in 5 states in 1966. With the court battles behind them and with Sandy's in explosive growth, in 1966 Lundberg stepped down as president of Sandy's and passed the reins to Jack Lockery, the protege he had groomed for 5 years. Lundberg would now have time and energy to devote to his family, his community, and philanthropy, raising money for the local college. As successful as Jack Lockery was as Sandy's new president and CEO, Lundberg's absence left a vacuum in a company that had grown so accustomed to his energy and his presence. Sandy's eventually grew to over 240 locations stretched across the U.S. from California to Florida, and even had locations in Belgium and Canada. While Lundberg continued his retirement from the business, the fast food industry began to change in ways that would soon threaten Sandy's profitability. With large corporations like General Mills, who had just recently purchased Burger Chef, and Pillsbury, who had purchased Burger King, utilizing their deep pockets to massive expansion efforts, and then McDonald's, who had secured major capital resources to fund their new television advertising campaigns, Sandy's leadership was feeling the pressure of a rapidly changing fast food landscape. Escalating costs for real estate, inflation, and now advertising, the franchisees were beginning to struggle, and without the hands-on approach they had grown to appreciate, Sandy's was in dire need of some capital to stay nimble enough to adapt to this quickly changing business. Sandy's wasn't the only chain to feel the heat. Henry's Hamburgers closed all but its over 200 stores in the early 1970s. Minnie Pearl's Chicken launched with a huge amount of over 1,800 franchises sold, only to dissolve all of them in just a few short years later. Sandy's needed to grow to keep up. Other chains that had the support of big banks, but based in small Kewanee, Illinois, Sandy's had just one bank for financing. Facing a public stock offering to raise money, Sandy's execs needed a better plan to feed the hungry cities across America. Lundberg answered the call and returned to work to help Sandy's work through its rising need for capital. The declining stock market took the idea of a public stock offering off the table, and that meant a new strategy was in order. Jack Lockery had an acquaintance, Leonard Rawls, who had just purchased an East Coast hamburger chain called Hardee's. Hardee's and Sandy's generally operated in different territories. Sandy's, mostly in the Midwest, and Hardee's in the East, were not directly competitive. Hardee's had plenty of ready capital, and Rawls was eager to expand, and he was impressed with Sandy's Lundberg approach to management. Rawls had built the Hardee's organization using solid financial and marketing skills, but battling management turnover, it was clear that he had never been able to create the culture that he knew he needed from Sandy's. The solution to Sandy's need for capital and Hardee's need for Sandy's business strength seemed to be a merger. After a series of meetings, the logic of a merger became apparent to everyone, and on November 30th, 1971, a press release of a possible Hardee's purchase of all Sandy's stock was announced. On December 2nd, a memo to Sandy's franchisees from Sandy's Systems President and CEO Jack Lockery offered thoughts on the press release and the possible merger between Sandy's Systems Incorporated and Hardee's Food Systems Incorporated. The advantages of this merger, we strongly feel, will be quite significant. For the first time in our industry, two very strong regional chains would come together to form a large national chain. In total, this merger would represent some 526 units. The expansion program in 1972 could total some 200 units. We are enthusiastic about it. This proposed merger would result in the combination of growth and development that would make Sandy's and Hardee's a very dominant force in the fast food industry. Originally, Sandy's was to maintain its image and remain a separate company. The last paragraph of the enclosed release is probably the most important to you. It reads as follows: following the merger, the two restaurant chains will continue to be operated under their established names. In other words, Hardee's will stay Hardee's and Sandy's will stay Sandy's. But at some point, the thinking on both sides changed. Brick Lundberg saw what was happening in the industry in the early 1970s. Local fast food restaurants such as Mr. Quick had problems due to lack of capital. Brick did not want Sandy's franchisees to eventually lose everything they had worked for, and he began to convince the franchisees to convert their stores to the Hardee's brand to protect their business interests. Since Lundberg had fostered so much trust with the franchisees, by 1973, 90% of the locations had agreed to switch to Hardee's. The other 10% held out and remained Sandy's for as long as they could. Sandy's Peoria was not only the birthplace of the chain, but it was also the spearhead of the transition from Sandy's to Hardee's. In this rare, amazing historical picture, we see Brick Lundberg, one of the founders, on the left, Paul White, another one of the original founders, on the right, and franchisee Bo Batchelder on the latter, switching one of the Peoria locations from Sandy's over to Hardee's. Sandy's became Hardee's overnight in many locations, running as Hardee's in the old classic Sandy's buildings before tearing them down and rebuilding them as soon as it was feasible. But many franchisees had been very successful with the Sandy's brand, and they weren't comfortable with the idea of converting to Hardee's. Since Hardee's originally said the Hardee's and Sandy's brands would operate as two distinct entities, about 10% of the 240 locations decided they would remain Sandy's. But by 1977, Hardee's made the decision to rein in the Sandy's brand and issue an ultimatum to any locations that had not converted to Hardee's. 1. Convert to Hardee's. 2. Drop the Sandy's brand, change the name, and do business independently. Or 3. Close the establishment. In 1979, the very last Sandy's location in Muscatine, Iowa, held out for as long as possible, and it made the transition to become a Hardee's. This picture was taken on May 15, 1973. 90% of Sandy's by this point had decided to convert to Hardee's. Notice the Hardee's H at the top of the sign as well as the Sandy's name. All 3 locations in my hometown of Decatur, Illinois became Buc-ee's in 1977. But like most of the 10% that refused to convert, they lacked the corporate guidance and went out of business within a couple of years. Some locations in the 10% hunkered down and applied what they learned during their time with Sandy's, remaining successful for several more decades. These locations included Zandy's in Great Falls, Montana, open until 2009. Sandy's in Billings, Montana, notice the spelling with 2 E's, open until 1997. And then there was Buc-ee's in Lawrence, Kansas. Interestingly, the Sandy's in Lawrence, Kansas was originally owned by the same partners that owned the Decatur, Illinois units, but was purchased during the conversion to Buc-ee's, which is probably a good thing as the Decatur locations closed just a few short years later, while the Lawrence location remained in business until December 14, 2007. After the merger, the Sandy's people touch had become the Hardee's philosophy, and so it was that Brick Lundberg could live out his last few years with the satisfaction of knowing that the organization he created would live on and that his own ideas and philosophies would live on with it. Sadly, Brick Lundberg passed away in March 1977. It is believed the success of Hardee's in the late 1970s through the 1980s was due to the leadership of Jack Lockery, Sandy's former CEO, who made the transition into Hardee's executive management during the merger. Rising to the top like he did during his time with Sandy's, he eventually became the CEO of Hardee's. Lockery was a highly respected leader who embodied in many of the traits of his mentor, Brick Lundberg. Lockery passed away in 2006. Some might say that Sandy's is gone forever, and while that is probably true, you have to wonder how much of the success Hardee's experienced in the late 1970s, all throughout the 80s, and into the 90s, was attributable to the purchase of Sandy's. Would Hardee's have been strong enough to do battle through the 70s and 80s without Sandy's, Jack Lockery, and the Lundberg approach? It's anyone's guess, but it seems clear that once Hardee's abandoned the principles that made it such a force in the 1980s, it has struggled ever since, resorting to cheap and tasteless marketing to account for the inability to stay true to its roots. If you'd like to see a video on the rise and fall of Hardee's, leave me a message in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe now. I'm Troy. Thanks for watching. God bless and make it an awesome day.